This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast. I'm Marianne Matzo. Charles!
Yes, and I'm here.
So, put your feet up, relax, and thank you for spending the next hour with us as Charlie talks about a recent book by Caitlin Doughty. In the second half, I'm going to be talking about children's grief, and in our third half, we will be performing a scene from Mr. Majorium's Wonder Emporium in our ongoing segment of Funeral Theater, where we put the fun in funeral.
Yes.
So, Charles, October 19th is Children's Grief Awareness Day. Children's Grief Awareness Day is designed to help us all become more aware of the needs of grieving children and of the benefits they obtain through the support of others. Children's Grief Awareness Day is an opportunity to make sure that grieving children receive the support that they need. Go to our webpage, and with this podcast, we have a link so that you can learn more about Children's Grief Awareness Day. And you know, Charlie, since I'm going to be talking in our second half about children's grief, and that's really difficult because it's sad to think of children hurting in those ways, do you happen to have a chocolate cake recipe that'll help me with this?
Actually, Mary McCarthy has one. She wrote an article about...
I thought it was Mary McNamara.
Yes, it is. I'm just wanting to make sure that you are paying attention, Mary Ann. You passed that test. Hang on, I'm going to break that in my notebook.
From McNamara's... Was it McNamara's Old Time Band?
I don't think it was Old Time Band, but McNamara's band. Yeah, McNamara's band. So, his distant relation, Mary McNamara... wrote an article about erection and maybe election anxiety as well for the LA Times and mentioned making chocolate cake as a sort of coping mechanism. Well, on the day after the election, she shared that chocolate cake recipe and wrote, "Come to think of it, it may be a recipe for devil's food cake. It came to me from my mother, Jinx McNamara, who got it from her mother, Mary Ann McNulty, for whom I was named. He was known to her grandchildren as Maymay, which, by coincidence, is the name of the cake. So hers is not a recipe I normally share beyond family because, well, every family should have one really great recipe that is all their own. But this has been a very tough year and a very tough election. And so on the off chance that this cake would make anyone's life a tiny bit better and easier for even a few minutes. So, with that in mind, we have a link on our webpage about how to make it. And share this with your shelter buddies or eat it alone in the privacy of your own bedroom, bathroom, whatever gets you through the day. And then repeat as necessary.
Oh, daily. So, Charlie,
Yes.
you heard a lecture from Caitlin Doughty
She
was at a press conference or something about, will a cat eat my eyeballs? So what I want to know is the cat going to eat my eyeballs?
Well, generally speaking, cats prefer, your eyeballs are covered by your eyelids. And generally speaking, kitties prefer soft tissue. So they would probably go more for, let's say, your mouth or your tongue.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
Yes, there we are. So I guess the old adage about having your cake and eat it too.
It's just gone to the cats.
Yes. As Mary Ann said, I had a chance to listen to an interview with Caitlin Doughty, which was hosted by the Strand Bookstore. And who is Caitlin Doughty? First, a little background. Unlike many boomers, young people are planning their own funerals and fueling changes in the death industry. Positive death movements, or death positivity, is a phrase coined by Caitlin, author of bestsellers Smoke Gets Into Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Mortuary. She is a mortician by trade. Also, From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death, and the aforementioned Will my cat eat my eyeballs? Big questions from tiny mortals about death, which was released in 2019. In the interview, Caitlin pointed out that death positivity is here for reality, the reality of death and dying. The positivity aspect is that we are positive about the impact of conversations and the impact of hard discussions to engage society and help move it out of this denial of death, especially in the Western world. To talk about death openly without people thinking there's something wrong with you or that you're weird. As Caitlin has said, death is not deviant. So have the conversations. The fact that you're going to die gives people urgency and a sense of meaning. She also spoke about corporate deaths, that basically the funeral industry is about profits and industrializing death, creating a chasm between feelings and finances and fueling phobia and death anxiety. Caitlin advocates the reform of Western funeral industry practices. She has previously said, "You have the power over what happens to that body," adding, "The dead person will still be dead in 24 hours. You have time to make the right decision for you, the living." I added the living. Or, as we have here at Everyone Dies advocated, prepare. It's all about preparation. You think clearer when you are not under pressure. Caitlin's web series, Ask a Mortician, has millions of subscribers. She is also the founder of the Order of the Good Death, which is listed as an association of like-minded death professionals, along with artists, writers, and academics. These folks aim to reform Western attitudes about death, funerals, and mourning to make a more death-informed society. The main inspiration for her advocacy work was a frequent absence of the decedent's families in the process, which she attributes to Western death anxiety and death phobia. She feels that death acceptance and reminders that we are mortal result in healthier grieving, mourning, and closure. Caitlin also wants you to know there are multiple funeral options, including natural burials, where a body is buried in the soil in a way that allows decomposition and is naturally recycled. Marianne, back to you.
Thank you. I might have to get a larger compost bin.
Yeah, and Christmas is not that far away, so maybe a little something on the old Christmas list.
Maybe a chainsaw to go with it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So please go to Everyone Dies and send us your recipes to share with others. Also, we appreciate your questions and anything that you want to tell us. You can email us at mail, M-A-I-L, at everyonedies.org. That's E-V-E-R-Y, the number 1, dies.org. Please join our Facebook group, Everyone Dies, and please remember to rate and review this podcast. Molly, our fabulous Twitter hoochie mama, is hoping that you contribute to making everything right in her world by following us on Twitter and reposting her tweets.
Does Molly know she's this week's hoochie mama?
She's every week's hoochie mama, but we don't always talk about it, because we are polite society.
Huh?
So, enough of our levity, because our second half is about children's grief, and it's a hard thing to talk about, and it's a hard thing to support a child through. But I got to tell you, how we do that, and if we do it well, will make a difference through their entire life in terms of how they see death. For many children, death is a new experience. Each time we experience something new as children, even when we're most excited about it, these experiences can be accompanied by feelings of fear, confusion, and uncertainty. Our first death is no different. That death may be of an animal or a family member, but even so, it's an unknown experience. Many children do not know what to expect, and often the adults in their lives don't know how to talk to them about it. As with most things, it's better to plan ahead about talking to a child about death than to wait and have to deal with your own loss and grief at the same time as you're trying to figure out what to tell your children. My kids, I was a hospice nurse, so they heard about death always,
Hmm.
constantly.
Yeah.
And I would talk about my patients and things I learned from my patients. So they grew up with death is what happens. Um, and so a couple of ideas to share with you. Use the words died and death. Don't say passed away. Don't say they went to heaven. Don't say they went to sleep. You are going to confuse the bejeebers out of your children.
Right.
So use the words dead, death. If you make up words, it's easy for the child to misunderstand what exactly it is you're talking about. If you say, well, grandpa went to sleep, you better believe that child's going to have a lot of difficulty going to sleep for quite a while because
Yeah,
they can see that grandpa's not breathing.
and I think
Yeah,
also
go ahead,
too
Charlie.
what I was just saying with what Caitlin was talking about. Uh, People still don't like talking about death, and will use
Right,
euphemism. I mean, not only with children, but with adults.
right.
Euphemisms, and somebody's dead. That's it. And instead of trying to sugarcoat it or to avoid it or try to make it into something it's not. It's just there's birth and there's death.
hmm
Mm.
And how children respond to death will depend on their age and on the adults around them. So we're going to do another podcast about talking to children at different ages because every different age has its own view
Right.
and because
Yeah.
of growth and development. So, Charlie, do you remember your first death?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was 7 years old, and my best friend, uh, his name was Jeffrey. He got hit by a car. We were both in the second grade.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and by coincidence, the funeral home was on my way home, and I knew about when his funeral was. I went in, and I still remember people looking at me. I didn't understand why. Um, I went up, to casket, and I saw him or his dead body. I said a little prayer, and went home. And that evening, I mentioned it to my mother and father that I had done that, and I still see the looks on their faces. Um, they weren't angry. They were well freaked out. I just still remember those looks. I didn't feel I'd done anything wrong. I remember my dad asking me about it, and I to this day I have no idea. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't frightened. Um, I don't know, Marianne. I remember clearly. I wasn't shocked or anything. I just I missed my friend. I was sorry that my friend was dead. But I was seven. I
That's
was seven.
incredible. So
Yeah.
your parents somewhere along the way must have instilled in you or maybe they never said anything and so going into the funeral home you think, well, this is just what you
Oh no,
do.
no. My
Why
mother
wouldn't
and
you?
father never never spoke about that. I finally broached the subject. I mean, but I was well into my 20s. Um, oh no, no,
So
no,
you
no.
didn't
I
it was
never
sort of
did.
like
No.
you didn't know that there was anything wrong or right about that.
Correct.
You just did what intuitively felt right to you.
Yes, exactly. That was it. Yeah. Yeah.
So when I was working in hospice, a lot of families would say, well, should we leave the children at home? And I would talk, that was like one of those conversations I would talk at length with them about would be if you got to know your child and you got to know yourself. Now, if you're going to be throwing yourself into the casket and doing kind of out of control behaviors that are going to frighten your child, well, then think about that. But when you talk to adults, and just ask your friends sometime, were you allowed to go to your grandparents' funerals? And those who were not will, in my experience, will say, they're still angry about it. They're still angry that their parents didn't let them go, that was part of a family event, that they felt that they should have been able to say goodbye to
Hmm.
their grandparents or to whoever it was who died. And it is better to let that child be involved in the planning of the funeral, or at least don't throw them out of the room. going to the funeral home. When I was a
Yeah.
kid, my first
Yeah.
death was my grandfather, and all of my cousins were there. And, they brought in, because back in those days, you didn't go out and get takeout, people brought in like
Yeah.
food into the back of the
Casseroles and yeah,
funeral home.
I remember that.
So we're
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
sitting in the back of the funeral home eating, you know. Um, but it was part of the family experience. And so fear and misinformation leads the kids to fill in the blank with fantasies. Like, well, okay, there's something you're not telling me, so I guess I'll figure it out. And they can come up with pretty fantastic kinds of fantasies.
Right, exactly. And
Overall,
what we're saying, earlier, just, that then, you without anyone saying the actions of the adults when you're a kid, stays with a lot of kids. So in the back of your mind, it's
mhm,
just become something taboo.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what else aren't they telling me? So overall, children need to know the truth when it comes to death. Children may feel misunderstood or alone when dealing with the loss. The changes and absence of the disease can be confusing to them. Many may want to talk about it, while other kids may not. The reactions that you can see with children in death, they could be denial, confusion, shock, anger, loss of appetite and concentration, guilt, withdrawal from friends and activities, reverting to outgrown behaviors, things like kids start wetting their bed again at night, that kind of thing, asking excessive questions about the deceased, inventing games about dying, and drops in school performance. So all of those things are opportunities to talk with your kid. What are you playing? So who gets to be the undertaker? Who's go- you know
mm,
well, you even play with them, like, well, so who gets to say the prayer, because children work through what's going on in their heads through their play. As adults, we tend to grieve for a prolonged, sort of uninterrupted period, and that can be, years. Children, on the other hand, experience grief in sort of short, intense bursts. When they But they grieve for far longer than what we might expect that they're going to. And we put a reference for a book by It's Okay to Cry by Norman Wright, who talks about this. Some distinctive general characteristics of grief in children are that a child is likely at first to deny death, then grieve intermittently for years. And I saw this with my own kids when they were little. When my sister died, it'd be like out of the blue, you buckling them in the car seat, would come a question about death or what goes on, or sort of
yeah.
like in your head, it's like, where the hell did that come from? So that's how children's heads work. They can put grief aside easier than an adult. One question might be about their grandfather's death, and the next question about their doll. So they'll oh, okay, that's what I wanted to know, and now what about this?
Do you know why that is? How kids
Because
can,
kids' brains aren't fully developed. So
right, and they're much
they
more resilient, of course.
a
Right, right, right.
well, and a kid's brain isn't fully developed until they say like around 25. So the they're immature brains. So that's
Yeah.
just how they
Okay.
work. And so part of how we help children is to understand how their brain works so that we can talk to them the way that they need to. Um, Children may postpone grief, or at least a part of it. But a child's grief often lasts throughout childhood. Pieces of it last into adulthood. So as parents, we really should be wary of concluding that a child is through the worst of it and is no longer grieving at all, because that's not true. They will continue to grieve. We need to be mindful, too, that new losses can trigger grief over old losses, and that unresolved grief will pursue a child and cause problems well into their adult years. So if the dog dies and you just in the secret of the night go out and dig a hole and bury it, or try to get a
Oh, right.
replacement
Yeah.
dog and
I,
not
I
think
remember.
the kid's going to notice.
I remember things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's just not the way it goes. At least not in a healthy way. Have that funeral. do a complete funeral and acknowledge that it's a loss and that it's painful and that we're going to miss Sparky or whoever it is. The issues for grieving children, there's sort of three prominent themes in grief expression in bereaved children. The first is, did I cause the death to happen? Children are very egocentric, meaning that the world revolves around them.
Right.
And so they personalize everything. They think it's all about them. Children often engage in what's called magical thinking, believing that they have magical powers. If a mother says in exasperation, "You're going to be the death of me," and later dies, her child may wonder whether she or he actually caused the death. Likewise, when two siblings argue, it's not unusual for one to say or think, "I wish you were dead." If that sibling were actually to die, the surviving sibling might think that his or her thoughts or statements actually caused the death. So you need to say to the child, nothing you did and nothing you thought caused whomever to die, unless they actually did, and that's a whole other story, a different podcast. So tell the child they didn't and how it really works. The second question that kids are going to ask about, remember they're egocentric, is this going to happen to me? The death of a sibling or another child may be especially difficult since it strikes so close to the child's own peer group. If the child also perceives that the death could have been prevented by either a parent or a doctor, the child may think that he or she could also die. And the third question is, who is going to take care of me? Since children are dependent upon parents and other adults for their safety and welfare, a child who is grieving the death of an important person in his or her life might begin to wonder who will provide the care that he or she needs when that person's gone. So to say to the child, I know that mom is dead, and I know that this is very sad, but you don't have to worry. I'm going to make sure that you get fed. I'm going to make sure that you get to school, or whoever that person is going to be. To reassure, and don't feel that, oh, I've said that once, I don't need to repeat it again. Children need repeated explanations, and hopefully with the same language. It's sort of like, like children like nursery rhymes and that kind of thing. The same language helps to reinforce the information. So how do you help a grieving child? First, explanation of the death. If you're silent about it, which indicates that the subject is taboo, it doesn't help the child to deal with the loss. When discussing death with the child, the explanation should be kept simple and direct as possible. Each child needs to be told the truth with as much detail as can be comprehended at his or her age and state of development. Questions should be addressed honestly, directly. Children need to be reassured about their own security. They frequently worry about that they will die or that their surviving parent will go away. Children's questions should be answered, making sure that the child processes the information. Now, the way that I explain death to children, and I have for a very long time, is that there's three reasons that people die. They die because someone is very, very sick, somebody is very, very old, or somebody is very, very hurt. And my sister, as you've heard me talk about a lot, died when my kids were in pre-K and kindergarten. And I would say before she died, Aunt Joan is very, very sick. And so when Aunt Joan died, she died because she was very, very sick. And one of the girls, I don't remember which one, said to me, looked at me and said, "Are you very, very sick?" I said, "No, I'm, like the next time I got a cold or whatever, I said, "No, I'm not very, very sick. I'm just sick. I just have a cold." And that became the code within the family of if there were two Verys in there, they knew that person was dying.
Right.
And even in their 20s, I'll say so-and-so's sick, and they'll say, "Are they very, very sick?" "Yes, they're very, very sick." And so it doesn't have to only be for children. You can keep that through your entire life as a way of saying this person is at a risk, of dying. They're very, very sick. They're very, very old. You could say, so and so is old. Well, are they very, very old? My kids think I'm very, very old, but I'm really not. So, using the correct language, although it's difficult conversation to initiate with children, any discussion about death should include the proper words. And I know I'm being really adamant about it, but it makes me crazy. I tell you, if you're talking about your anatomy or if you're talking about this, use the right words.
Absolutely.
It's not
Yes. Yeah.
it's not a dinky, it's a penis. It's not, use the right words. My mother-in-law used to be aghast when my children would refer to, their urethra or something, and she'd be like, "Oh my God," But I just, come on. You can use the right word. If you can learn the wrong word, you can learn the right word. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No, but then actually, then something like that, what you said a little bit earlier about, use the right words, the proper words with the kids. Don't, try to, cover it up. That's with some kids that stays with you, so that then it produces, adults who don't want to discuss death, or they put little euphemisms about them instead of just getting to the point. Yeah.
Which is what we are, part of our agenda is, come on, let's talk about it. Let's plan for it. It's okay. It's going to happen. The fact that you talk about it isn't going to make it happen. Right. And the fact that you don't talk about it is going to make it not happen. So use proper words with kids. Use the word cancer, died, death. Euphemisms such as passed away or he is sleeping or we lost him should never be used because they can confuse children and lead to misinterpretation. I remember when Julie's teacher's mother died and she wanted to write a note to her, a card to her, and she asked her dad, "What should I write?" And he said, "Write that she's sorry that she lost her mom." And then, as kids do, they go to the other parent and say, "Well, Dad says I should write this. Should I write that?" And I said, "Well, how did she lose her? Did they go to the mall and she lost her?" And she said, "No, she died, Mom." It's like, well, then say, "I'm sorry she died." She's like, "Oh, okay." Use the word. We should start a campaign. Use the word.
Oh, there we are. Yes.
So plan rituals. Another way to help a grieving child. After a death occurs, children can and should be included in the planning and participation of mourning rituals. As with bereaved adults, these rituals help children to memorialize loved ones. Although children should never be forced to attend or participate in mourning rituals, their participation should be encouraged. Children can be encouraged to participate in those aspects of the funeral and memorial service in which they feel comfortable. If the child wants to attend the funeral, the wake, the memorial service, whatever, it's important that a full explanation of what to expect in advance be given. Tell them, here's what happens. This preparation could include the layout of the room, who might be present, like family and friends, what the child will see. They'll see a casket, they might see people crying, and what will happen. The surviving parent may be too involved in his or her grief to give their child the attention needed. Therefore, it's helpful to identify a familiar family friend or family member who'll be assigned to care for the grieving child during the funeral. Don't assume that you can grieve the loss of your spouse and manage, the children through, a couple days of that kind of thing. So, also encourage questions from your children. Say, that let them ask whatever they want. Don't be afraid to say, "I'm not sure about that myself," or "I don't know how to answer that." Children might say, "So what happens up in heaven?" It's like, "Well, I don't know. I don't know." And then turn it around and say, "Well, what do you think happens?" And you can talk about it. Allow them to be comforted in knowing that what their beliefs are, and encourage them to choose their own beliefs and how they think about things. Grieve with the child. Too often, adults bottle up emotions and reactions to death, either out of fear or that they're going to appear vulnerable in hopes that saying nothing will help the pain go away. Let yourself cry and admit that you feel sad. The first death that my girls experienced was when our dog Lincoln died, and And I knew he was
Mm.
dying, and we took out books of him when he was a baby, and we looked at pictures, and we laughed, and he was right there with us, and and he was part of that, and we all said goodbye to Lincoln and talked about what he meant to us and how much we loved him, and they were a part of digging that massive hole because he was 100-pound black lab, and burying him, and it was all part of life. And I was sad. I had him. I had Lincoln before I had babies, and I cried, and I don't think they'd ever seen me cry before. And I said,
Yeah.
it's sad. It's sad that Lincoln's not going to be with us anymore. I loved him, and now I'm not going to see him anymore. And so expressing what you're feeling will help the child to express what they're feeling.
And then also
And
too, not
offer,
not just a child, but it helps you too. I mean, why
right,
leave things bottled up in your own self? Because then, death will not stop. There will be other deaths in your life. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Deal with it now or deal with it later, but you're going to deal with it. Show your love, reassure your child that you're going to be there for them through this difficult time. Death is often a new experience for children, and what follows for them is uncharted territory. News of the death may make your child very afraid of losing you. Reassure them that you're there. Respond with soothing gestures. Give them a hug, hold their hand, stroke their hair, sing them a song. Remind your child that most people who are hurt or sick get better and live until they're very old. Your child might be unsure about what he or she is feeling. Is it normal? Is it okay? Let them know that whatever they're feeling is completely normal. You might say, I know you're going to miss, Grandpa a lot, because he was a wonderful grandpa. He made you laugh, and he, held you and took you cool places. This tells them it's okay to feel different emotions, both happy and sad, when they're thinking about the grieving process. And second to last, help them memorialize the deceased. Find ways that you can do something special in memory of the person who died. Plant a tree or frame a photo, or, well, don't release balloons. That's not good for the environment. But, you can create a memory box or bake a cake on the deceased birthday. It's important to children to know that just because someone dies doesn't mean that you don't ever talk to them again, and that you don't ever think about and maybe celebrate with them. If your child is really not doing well after, giving them a little bit of time to go through this, seek outside help. That's perfectly appropriate, both for the child and for yourself. Parents can help their children by grieving with them, listening to them, offering love and reassurance, helping them memorialize the deceased, encouraging questions, and seeking professional help. Your children are going to learn about death from you. And so do it well, because it's then going to impact how they grieve the rest of their life. So please take a look at our additional resources for this podcast on our webpage, everyonedies.org. And if there's a particular topic that you want us to talk about, please let us know. Bless you.
Thank you.
So in our third half, we're going to do a little quickie scene, because Charlie and I like doing little quickies, called from...
And this is how rumors get started. All right.
Well, like if I'm going to ad lib. So it's a short scene from Mr. Majorium's Wonder Emporium. And it is one of my favorite kind of film scenes about the idea of death. It's the story of Molly, who inherits a magical toy shop from her eccentric 243-year-old boss, Mr. Majorium. In this scene, Mr. Majorium is dying, and he shows us what we can... Are you raising your hand at me? What?
Isn't it Megorian?
I don't know.
I only ask because it's a G. I don't know. Maybe it is pronounced Majorian. I'm sorry, but
Well, but he could be like
of the Jew of
I don't know,
the Jewish
some other
persuasion.
country.
There we are.
Yeah, and it could be a
Yeah.
majorium.
All
Like if you're a major, it's Magor, right?
Marjorie Main, Marg, Marjorie Main, Ma Kettle. I suppose so.
She was wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Mhm.
But I'm going with Mr. Majorium, and
Very
it could
good.
be Mr. Megorium. But either way, he's dying. And this is a scene where he talks about the simplicity of death. And I'm going to play Mahoney, which is the girl, Molly Mahoney, who's inheriting. And Charlie is going to play Mr. Majorium.
Why do you always get to play the girls?
'Cause
Oh, you're a girl. Right. Okay. Yeah. Let me make a note of that. Okay. All right. Let's rock and roll.
okay, you got the first line.
Well, Mahoney.
Don't go.
My darling.
I'm not ready. I'm not ready for it to end.
I'm sorry. When King Lear dies in Act 5, do you know what Shakespeare has written? He's written, he dies. That's all. Nothing more. No fanfare, no metaphor, no brilliant final words. The culmination of the most influential work of dramatic literature is, he dies. It takes Shakespeare, a genius, to come up with, he dies. And every time I read those two words, I find myself overwhelmed with dysphoria. And I know it's only natural to be sad. But not because of the words, he dies, but because of the life we saw prior to the words. I've lived all 5 of my acts, Mahoney, and I'm not asking you to be happy that I must go. I'm only asking that you turn the page, continue reading, and let the next story begin. And if anyone ever asks what became of me, you relate my life in all its wonder and end it with a simple and modest, he died.
I love you.
I love you too. Your life is an occasion. Rise to it. Goodbye, my love. And for all you lovely listeners, thank you for listening. Please stay tuned for future episodes of Everyone Dies. Our thanks to our executive producer, retired Major General David, our producer Sandy, John, our technical advisor, Molly, our Twitter correspondent, and our friends, family, and our loyal listeners who are supporting our work at Everyone Dies. This is Charlie Navarrete.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.